time to go. And I'll do your intro, and then you get to take it away. Sergey, yeah. Yeah, Hoganson.
Mel was telling me she had a funeral today.
Yeah, her mom passed away. I'm sure it feels very odd to her to have the funeral today. So. I do, yeah.
There was the life with your mother on the planet, and I was like, with your mother off the planet.
Oh yeah, especially end of day, you never know. Everyone could want to go, but be too tired to go.
Yeah, so I will actually let you know, like, kind of the structure. There's this kind of breaking point. They want to leave and pick it up online. Either I'll go to London to stay for the happy ending, but I will let them know there's this period in about 45 minutes that if they want to, that's what the doodle is for.
Welcome. Welcome to the Johnson County Library's 2024 Writers Conference. If you have questions, look for a staff member in a pink Write Your Story t-shirt. If a session is full or has already started, please don't enter. There are plenty of other come and go options throughout the library. We also wanted to mention that we are grateful to the Joan Berkeley Writers Fund, administered by the Johnson County Library Foundation, for their ongoing financial support of our writing programs. My name is Ashley Fick, and I'm a program coordinator at Johnson County Library. Today's program is part of our 9th annual Writers Conference. Check out our For Writers page for more information about writing contests, the Joko Writes blog, and other resources and events. If you tag us on social media, don't forget to use the hashtag Joko Writes. There will be time at the end for questions. Staff will be walking around with a microphone for any participant with a question. It's important you talk into the microphone so we can hear you on the live stream or in the recording. And we are very excited to have with us Portico Bowman. Portico Bowman believes infinite structures of language craft the images for characters who have unpredictable and transformative lives. For the past 20 years, Portico's home was in a collage of places. She worked in Kansas as an art professor, art writer, and gallery director. Her favorite art supply is glitter, and she was recently awarded a Canada Council for Arts Research and Creation grant for her second book, Would You Give Up Arms for Wings? With that, I'll turn it over to Portico Bowman for writing My Way to Creative Freedom.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And I also want to thank Helen Hokinson for the invitation today. And I just understand that her mother has passed, and that's a very big story. And anyway, I'm very grateful for her invitation. And very grateful you all are here. There's more of you than I expected at the end of the day. So I have a couple of other thank yous, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the structure of the talk. And sort of there is a casual breaking spot. I want you to stay for the happy ending. But, you know, it's Friday and it's still beautiful out. And you might have had a very long day, so if there will be a moment where you need to go, but just I'm very daunted by this live streamed business. Hello, live stream. I'm going to say hello to my mother. Who knows where this stream goes? Space friends, because really this is like live streamed. My dad in Canada, my Tom at home, and my friend Joe in South Africa. The cosmos is covered, you know, and I think that's why we're here. And the YouTube-ness for sure. I have notions of being, you know, an 80-year-old woman living in my senior house with my very good friend, Dr. Casey Hermanson, who surprised me with a text the other day, said, "I'm registered, I'm coming." But I'm going to say something that is not on this very highly developed script that I'm going to say to my elderly friends in my house. You want comedy night? There's that talk I gave in 2024 at the Writers' Conference. It was so funny. Talked about Sprace Friends the whole time. I was supposed to talk about my book. Anyway, this long-lasting YouTube-ness is also partly why I said yes, because I hope that what I offer you will be available to other people, and the message I hope to share is one that's really important to me. And you're here for you. You're not here for me. I'm totally clear on that, and so I hope that something that I say will be what you're going to take away. And these glasses, right? Okay, you've already made a picture of me in your head about these glasses. So I have to just show you, and I really do front-end the humor. I front-end the humor. I'm going to get so serious by the end. But I bought both these glasses in Canada, and these ones were supposed to be just for when I was in a mood, like I'm in the mood to look like this. And my dear childhood friend said, "You have the only face that could wear those glasses." I thought it was a compliment. But I bought these ones, and they are really the ones I've been wearing most, and they went like this. But my new ones that are coming, and I'm actually going to drive down to Pittsburgh, Kansas to my eye doctor. Can't get in till next week. He's that amazing. Are these ones. And this is how I really see the world. Through blue glitter. And I just have to thank you. I just have to say this book helped me know that these are my glasses. And I'm also teaching in a lower school now. And so, you know, these are going to be certainly appreciated. So thank you for the compliment on my glasses. They do show up. I was surprised how much they show up, but they're kind of intense, you know. So the structure. So I need to talk about me for about 8 minutes. And then I'm going to talk about Paulus, the person who is the core of the book that I have written about him. And that book was recently a finalist for the Associated Writing Program and Writers Programs finalist. And to have arrived at that place through this book is mind-bending to me. Do you need to know who I am, who Paulus is? And then I'm going to there'll be 8 minutes on me, 8 minutes on Paulus, and then about a half hour talking what I consider to be the heart of the matter and telling you about quoting him very specifically and what inspired the book, and then the creative freedom that he delivered to me that I think is part of why we're all enjoying this book so much, the Canada Council, AWP, and then there'll be a bit of a break. So if you kind of are thinking that's about 45 minutes, you're thinking about your day, feel free, you know, I'll not take it personally if you need to go then. But after that, because then after that I'm going to tell you about all the obstacles, the 5 years it took to write the book, and all the obstacles along the way, my own personal ones, and then the structure, creating the structure. And then there's the happy ending. So if you can stay for the happy ending, that'll be there. And I am not a TED Talk person. I have notes. And again, I also have a really I have a Paisley brain, and it can end up who knows where. So I really kind of need to stick to this script that I have, and I have little note, like LU means look up. Like look up at Connie, look up at Connie, remember Casey's there, so if you see me doing that, that's like, oh, I read look up. So I want to just kind of make sure I stay with the material that I've prepared for you. And ultimately, I would just say, writing my way to creative freedom, this book that I wrote, Would You Give Up Arms for Wings, a story inspired by the visionary life and writings of Paulus Berensohn, was about overcoming creative fear. So if I was going to write a book about overcoming creative fear, I needed to do that myself. So that's a large part of what I'll be talking about today. So this is my first book. I wrote it in between grade 3 and grade 4. Back in the day, my mother typed it. This was my first published book. My mother published this for me. Back in the day when you used like manual typewriters and whiteout and the little piece of stuff that you put in there. And I was a writer. Kathleen Richards' Mystery of the Diamond Ring. It has chapters, it has an arc, it has a narrative. I remember that summer, I was a writer. And then I'm like going to grade 4. So then I'm in grade 6, and Mrs. Miller, I know you all have your own Mrs. Miller. Mrs. Miller was the teacher, and she gave us a writing assignment. And I wrote a really amazing short story because I'm a writer, right? I did that when I was 9, not even 9. And I didn't get a big star. I didn't get an A. I think I got like a B. And so I went to ask her after school, because I'm a writer, what was wrong with my story? And she looked at me over her aged and plumped cheeks, probably kind of like mine now, probably about my age now. She was a school librarian, and she was probably tired, and she'd had a long day, and I get it now. But she said to me, I don't have time. So what that means to someone that when you're 11 is you don't have time for what's most important to me, or what I am, so it must not be very important. And so I put away my writer that day. She ate it. And my mom remembers the day, and I came home different. I came home different. What I was had not been. You're so tender at that age. You're trying to show who you are. Like, here I am. What do you think of this as me? And when there's no time for it, you just put it away. So I did do the illustration. That's my own illustration of the cover of my book. And so I had an art voice. I had an art voice, so I just turned in that direction. And against a whole other set of odds, I eventually became, an art professor. In 1998, at the age of 35, I was leaving Canada for graduate school at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, for an MFA in ceramics and sculpture. After 11 years as a practicing studio artist, not starving, but not successful enough to earn a living. So I was looking for the opportunity to teach at a university to give young people more information that I got from my BFA degree. And yet that summer before I left, the Saskatchewan Craft Council asked me to write a review about a ceramic artist. And something in me said yes, and I did, and I wrote this review. And I had then this published piece. And then that first year in graduate school, Janet Mansfield from Ceramics, Art and Perception in Australia came to UT, and it was somehow decided that because I had this published piece, this like tiny little column in this tiny little publication in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, that was enough credential for Janet that I was now being asked to write a essay about my professor, which I don't necessarily recommend, but you know, it worked out okay. And then I had written another piece, but I still wasn't a writer. I wasn't a writer, I was just writing about art, you know, I wasn't a writer. But it wasn't too long before I had a dozen or more essays about artists, and my rule, and still is I only write about art that I wish I'd made. And those of you who we write, right, to know the world and be in a world and participate in a world and become a part of it. So it was always my way to become a part of that artwork because it was so amazing. But I still wasn't a writer. I just wrote. And I could check off my academic boxes because I was writing things. Then one day in the middle of a downward dog in my 40s, I stood up, found a pen, and wrote a paragraph for no good academic reason. And later that evening, in our nightly FaceTime call, I read the paragraph to my partner, Tom, now husband, who at that time lived in San Diego, while I lived and taught in Pittsburgh. And what you need to know about Tom is he does not say nice things for polite reasons. I don't hold that against him. I just know that to be true about him. And he also has this amazing deep insight into literature, his own profound literary talent, private and Ivy League educations, none of which I'd had or even come close to having. So I believed him. You need to keep going. So I did. And a couple years later, I'd written 100 pages after that paragraph. And so I thought I'd written a book, right? You know, if we have a whole bunch of pages, it's like, wow, look at me, I wrote a book. But we know that's not a book, right? It's just the first draft. That's what I had written, a first draft. But what I did know is I was a writer. And so that was powerful to me. That was powerful to me. And although I hadn't written a book, I was a writer. So Al Forey at Thistledown Books in Saskatchewan read a piece that I sent, thinking I'd written a book, and I got feedback, like, you have a very original voice. I see it. Find an American publisher and we'll co-publish. Well, that was like find two publishers, right? But it was definitely an encouragement. So 2 years later, a short story of mine was given a small award by the Summer Literary Series in Montreal, and I was offered a small scholarship to attend a workshop with Alison Pick, who is a Booker Prize nominee for her book, Far to Go, right down that title, Far to Go. It's a really amazing story. And at that workshop, she called my writing sample spectacular, and ever since I've called her my teacher, my mentor, and my guide. And she taught at the Humber School for Writers, and I applied to get to that school. It was an online graduate certificate, and applied to work with her, so there had to be a certain credibility, like level of writing to get in, and then another level of writing to have her as my teacher. And so another couple years later, I had my Humber certificate. And you can see here, Tom gave me my Tadpole Writership, Portico Bowman, for novel navigation, symbol, energy, and metaphor metamorphosis. Because I was very clear about the fact that while I was waiting to read if I'd gotten into Humber, how I was going to feel if I didn't get in, I was very clear. That was like so clear. I know that depression, art and writing and music and all of these art forms that we do, when we put them out there and it comes back no, I knew that for many years of being in the arts. But then I was visiting my parents at the time in Saskatchewan. I was driving my mother crazy because the email was there and I couldn't open it. I just couldn't open it. And then you do your strategies, right? You do whatever strategies you have. And this is the Saskatchewan sky, living Saskatchewan sky, driving up there this summer where there's rainbows when it hasn't even rained, because that is the land of living skies. And so what I did was I thought, okay, well, you know how you're going to feel if you didn't get in. How are you going to feel if you got in? And this is like a key thing for me. It's like, I'm going to feel like a tadpole. I'm just going to feel like a tadpole. I'm going to feel like I'm a little tadpole, and they threw me in the water, and all I got to do is wiggle. And that was a key image for me, that I am a tadpole, and so when I opened the email, and there it was, that I was in fact accepted. I've been wiggling ever since, and that level of relationship to what I was doing and needing to do nothing more than wiggle has really meant all the difference for me. So that's me. That's just a little bit of a history. I hope what you didn't hear was I didn't go to some amazing school and I've been doing nothing but writing books since all the way through, and it's been so easy. That is not my story. So now I want to tell you the story of Paulus Berensohn. And this is him, Paulus Berensohn, a dancer who pivoted to pottery, dies at 84. That was published in 2027. And so I've never met Paulus Berensohn anywhere but in my imagination. He died at age 84, 6 months after I heard about him the first time in 2017. When some other evening on FaceTime, Tom shared Lewis Hyde's essay, The Senses of Penland, and read the excerpt that outlined a few of the 60 senses that Paulus had collected. For example, number 1, the sense of seeing without eyes, such as heliotropism, or the sun sense of plants, or the sense of season, including the ability to insulate, hibernate, and winter sleep. I think the part about the winter sleep resonated to me as a Canadian, this notion of following the sun as a sense, and we're going to talk today, and the earth is tipping away from the sun, and we're going to spill out into the dark. I was mesmerized by that. It's like, wow, that's really cool. Tom sends me a lot of amazing things to read, so I just sort of filed that away. Like, thanks. And then a few months later, Tom sent me a copy of the New York Times obituary of Paulus Berensohn. And it described Paulus as a dancer, potter, teacher, and environmentalist, and it went on to say, Mr. Berensohn was an early proponent of deep ecology, an environmental movement that values all living beings equally, and he became more vocal about environmental issues as he grew older. For decades, he said he did not fire his pinch pots, but rather placed them in the forest to melt back into the earth. For 2 decades, he did that. In his later years, he continued to advance the idea that money ought not be the goal of the creative process. He championed the creative potential of the average person. At a young age, he said he developed a desire to deprofessionalize my interest in art. Okay, I was interested in that. I was deeply interested in that. He goes on to say, I am very interested in the behavior of art rather than the achievement of art. He told the Juilliard Journal in 2010, I see all the arts as apprenticeships for the big art of our lives. And something in this took hold of me and would not let go. And you might call it destiny, or a deep sense of knowing, or a clarion call for my salvation, but I swiftly decided my second book would be about Paulus. I'm a 3-book person. I have one more. I know that. I was deeply grieved I had never met him. How come I, a person who had 2 art degrees by then, a BFA and MFA, I'd been working as an art professor for almost 20 years, and 10, 11 years before that. I'd been in and out of art worlds for decades, but I'd never heard of Paulus. And I learned quickly enough, Paulus was on the fringe. He was on the fringe of everything, but the fringe is what makes the selvage of a piece of fabric. That's that hard part that won't unravel. And I grabbed that edge and knew the book, my second to write, would be how I would meet Paulus and how he would become my teacher. And so he has been now for 5 years. Furthermore, and singularly so, I would continue his work as a deep ecologist and have a chance to do my own work. So I was 11 years old when the right taillight of Paulus's Volvo Amazon winked west for the open unknown road to San Diego, where Paulus hoped to find healing from a precancerous diagnosis. 2 years before, in 1972, my 4th grade teacher asked me to write an essay about what I wanted to be when I grew up. I had heard of conservationists. I was interested in saving the world. I wrote my essay and drew a cover of cattails in a Saskatchewan sunset. But by the 1980s, when I was old enough to make decisions about my adult life, tie-dye t-shirts, braids, and ideological bravery were replaced by polyester pinstripes and hairspray. Conservationists were hard to find. So from the early days of this project, I wanted to validate my claim that the parallels of Berensohn's bodily malaise, his sickness, his illness, that took him from Pennsylvania at that time out to California, are reflected in the eco-catastrophe of our time. I saw that connection. And with this born sort of my own intuitive sense. And soon I was serving a sabbatical appointment at the Ceramics Research Center with Garth Johnson in Tempe, Arizona. True, I decided to write the book. I'm writing a book about Paulus Berensohn. Yeah, I am going to do it. Read his obituary was about where I was at. But I still knew very little about Paulus. I also knew very little about Garth Johnson, although I was at ASU to digitize 1,367 Studio Potter interviews from cassette tape to digital and work with Liz Lerman. But I mentioned to Garth in a rather offhand remark on my first day my writerly intention. I had no idea that Garth himself was one of the people transformed by a Paulus encounter, but it was only a matter of moments on that first day that Garth sent me down to the nearest coffee shop with a copy of Paulus's classic book and another by M.C. Richards, his longtime teacher and friend and mentor, his Allison Pick, I think you could say. And when I returned to Pittsburgh State University, I requested a week to spend at the Archives of American Art. And my former student, Ross Chartel, had arrived there earlier as an intern. That was through another series of serendipities. I have so many. I have a stack of serendipities so high on this project. But there he was working at the Archives of American Art when Paulus's archives arrived. And then I arrived in February 2019. So I had already written this. I'm about to read you something that I had written in my notes when I was applying for the week off in February to go to the Archives of American Art. And I had written, Michelangelo's monumental David was set free by the sculptor's belief he was inside the stone. The unfinished slaves, that's another piece of Michelangelo's, bear witness to this process. Berensohn excavated his life from the boundaries of ego and matter to in turn become my Michelangelo. And I hope I look trustworthy and you will believe me please believe me, that I will tell you the first box, the first morning at the archives, I opened it up, and this is what was there. So I was just like, okay, that's intense. And then here's those intense glasses. And I think it was actually this photo of myself. It's like, wow, those are really intense. Those are really intense. But here I was, and I have 2,900 documents from that week. And I unpacked a Paulus I didn't know. I didn't know he was a writer. I didn't know that he drew. I didn't know that these images were things, the doodle drawings that he did. This was the Paulus that I had seen in the book. But then here was the Paulus I was already committed, but this took me to another level. So I'm going to take you now kind of into what I consider to be the heart of the matter. You can see 28 minutes. If you want to know how I know exactly how many minutes these are, or know how I type this, that's in Q&A. But this is the part where at the end, if you might have what you came for, I'll hope you'll have what you came for. But I was talking to a sweet young girl this week, well, they're all very sweet, Kennedy, and she was telling me about a trip she was taking to Florida, and she said, when you get on the plane, that's where the magic begins. I thought, oh, that's so profound, and that's what you say when you're 9. And so this is sort of where the magic began for me. And so what's come to be of exceptional interest to my research and writing is that while I have sought to understand Paulus Berensohn, his source ideologies, and the man himself, through the vast archives and unpublished trove of written materials, I have found him to be an intuitive force and a source of wisdom connected to a very deep and vulnerable investigation into his own fear. I didn't expect that, but that was something else I found on that first morning. And in notes for an unpublished book that's in those archives called The Circular Loom, Paulus writes, "In my early 40s, almost for the first time, and probably due to a serious illness, I became consciously aware of the phenomenon of fear and that I was feeling frightened. I did not know then that this was the beginning of something and not an end. What felt like death throes may have been birth pains. However, it has taken much of this decade to come to what feels now like a healthy respect for fear and to learn how to move with it and beyond its undifferentiated and differential face. However, at the beginning, it felt like a shroud and a straitjacket." That all made sense to me. I knew all about that. I knew all about that fear, and I knew all about that really resonated with me. So Paulus's life for me has become a narrative study of the human psyche's essential longing for freedom and the potential for natural fulfillment through enchanted mystical experiences that for most of my life, in my time, were taboo. However, writing this book broke that for me. Paulus's example and relationship to his artistic practice and deep ecology is the alchemical transformation and potential for worldwide global healing in my own. So perhaps of most significance is I've discovered mind-bending connections between Paulus's original visionary experience that inspired my book and the cultural forces most impactful on my life in times. And I continued writing Would You Give Up Arms for Wings, a story inspired by the visionary life and writings of Paulus Berensohn, for two main reasons. I wanted to understand the forces that swept away those fledgling years that inspired Earth Day, recycling, and renewable energy. And I wanted to understand the creative and visionary experiences of Paulus Berensohn. His primary message and the quote for which my entire book is based begins on what I discovered that first day. And it even just the fact that I'd never knew he lived in San Diego, and I'd been traveling back and forth to San Diego Tom and I were long distance for 18 years, which you can do when you're older, and they invented Skype and FaceTime and those things. But I had no idea Paulus had ever spent any time in San Diego, and there I was on that first day, discovering that he had been there. The discovery of the Silver Sword memoir, which inspired my book, and the connection to San Diego was like this lightning rod right through my body that morning. And you've all had them. You wouldn't be here if you hadn't. You have those moments where life walks up and says, here it is right about me. You know it. You wouldn't be here otherwise. That's why we do this work, right? The memoir, his Silver Sword memoir, I flipped open and read almost immediately the passage that I knew was my reason for being there and my reason for writing the book. And Paulus's Silver Sword experience and memoir was inspired by his attendance at the matinee screening of Ingmar Bergman's film version of his staging of Mozart's opera Die Superflute, which I didn't say right. We'll laugh about that at the seniors' home. And there'll be someone there who knows how to say it perfectly. Also known as the Magic Flute, on Christmas Day in 1974. And it turns out the very ideology that inspired the opera is the ideology and philosophies that inspired the entire counterculture of the 1960s and the 1970s. And I didn't know that, and I don't think any of the hippies knew that either. Tom is a hippie. But that their ideas are embedded in ancient Greek and Egyptian philosophies known collectively as Hermes Trismegistus. Certainly I didn't, but now I do. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read the part of his memoir that inspired the book, but I'm now reading from my book. And the essential happy ending that I'm going to talk about is the frame story. Have any of you seen The Magic Flute? This one I'm talking about. Required viewing. If you leave early, you have to go home and download it and read it. Plus Paulus's documentary, and I have other things at the end. But it's this very powerful film of a stage of The Magic Flute being filmed with the audience. So there's the real audience watching the stage, and then Bergman's created this film in case you would know how many walls are being broken through all of that. But it's a fascinating tool or device. So I'll just sort of leave you there at that point, and I'll talk more about that at the end. But just so you know so now we're in my book, Would You Give Up Arms for Wings? We drop into the train ride. There's a train ride where the narrator, Helen, who is my mother's name, but it's really me. We do that too. So Helen is my mother and me, which is very true, who is writing a book about Paulus. She's a 20-year-old something, writing a book about Paulus. And because I always said if I'd met Paulus in my 20s, I would have had a completely different creative life. So I'm doing that in my book, because we also write the stories we want, right? It's also why we write. So Helen is writing a book about Paulus, and she's preparing to read what she has written, and it's here where I bend back and forth between my magical realism and the non-fiction component of Paulus verbatim from his Silver Sword memoir, and that I discovered that very first morning at the archive. So, into the book, on the train, listening to Helen the narrator of this part of the story reading her work. Paulus is there, and this other fellow, Bellini, is there, and okay. So, I'll tell the silver sword right after Tony's dream comes true, Helen said. She was bright with her plan, confident, happy. That will be too late, the woman said. Helen's enthusiasm dimmed. She didn't like to be told she was making a mistake. It felt the same as being a mistake. Feelings are fickle. Anger flared over hope. Helen threw the lotion back in the bag and zipped the darkness of the duffel shut. The sound was satisfying, and it was something to do. The zip recovered control. Helen would have to rework the entire outline and struggle through another draft if the black eyes were right. Helen did not want to start over. Starting over is the same as failure. She was sure of it. Paulus leaned across the cabin. He offered a solstice moment. Tell it now, Paulus said. Alexandrite, both green and red, mixed, looked like his hazel eyes smiling in that moment. Helen received his gift. Paulus always had one. It's your story. You tell it, Helen sat back. The train began to slow. Paulus looked at Bellini. You have time, Bellini said. The outskirts of the city spread wide. They're on a train going into Florence, Italy. Paulus bowed his head. He was the amaryllis in full bloom. The old woman now nodded her approval. You'll have to read the book when it's published to know who that old woman is. I'm not going to tell you. It was Christmas week when I arrived in San Diego, Paulus said. I didn't know a soul. On Christmas Eve, I felt alone, and these are his actual words from the memoir. And the key to everything. I didn't know a soul. On Christmas Eve, I felt alone and displaced. It was 80 degrees with a dry, fragrant Santa Ana wind. I called the farm in Pennsylvania where it was below freezing with several inches of snow in the ground and a fire in the Franklin stove. My friends toasted my recovery with wine over the distance between us. On Christmas Day, the beach was empty and the ocean was fairly silent. Loneliness gripped me in another kind of pain, and whatever book I was reading lost its interest. In the early afternoon, I drove from shopping center to shopping center looking for a movie theater that was open and showing something I might want to see. Just as I was about to give up, I discovered a small cinema 15 minutes from the matinee screening of Ingmar Bergman's film version of The Magic Flute. I have it written here in the German, but I don't need to do it like that again because they're still laughing at the seniors' home from the first time I said it wrong. The magic flute, Bellini said. Yes, said Paulus, it was such good fortune. My spirits immediately began to lift. I had owned an English version recording of excerpts from the opera and played it so often that I knew most of the arias by heart, but I did not know its plot sequence and had never seen it staged. The opera is filmed in a tiny theater, in a tiny wooden Swedish opera house somewhere in the woods. During the overture, the camera focuses on one face after another in the audience sitting in the theater. The audience is international, and the variety of nationalities exaggerate the point that the story is of universal in its significance. Every ninth face, Bergman shows us the image of a young pre-adolescent girl, the same one each time, looking rapturously and with expectation towards the curtainless stage. Twice during moments important in the unfolding of the story itself, the camera momentarily flashes back to her face, giving me the impression that the story is not only for all of us, but especially for the wondrous, innocent child in us. Paulus paused. Are you sure we have time for the story? Yes, Bellini said, there are 3 more stations. Well, all right then, because you need to know the whole story to understand my story. It's that way for everyone, the old woman said. Paulus nodded and continued. The opera began to unfold on the tiny stage, filmed as it were a live performance. There were imaginative stage effects, a dragon and an animal, 3 genii descending from above the proscenium in a balloon. The music was glorious and well sung. The cast of characters included Tamino, a handsome young Egyptian prince, and his shy, bubbling friend, a bird catcher named Papagino. At the climax of the opera, Tamino and Pamina are taken to a rocky cave with a waterfall on one side and a huge fire on the other. They are frightened and terrified that they will be overcome by the fire and the force of the waterfall. A solemn march sounds. Hermes Trismegistus, said Helen, as above, so below. No new age is possible without the ancient age, especially in 1975. I was absolutely, in the case of Paulus speaking, I was absolutely enchanted and carried away by the experience. I was startled to find myself in a movie theater when the lights came up. I drove home full of excitement to the Crystal Pier in San Diego, where he got the last room on the very last night of Christmas Eve, thinking about the magic flute and what I sensed in it for myself. And this, okay, I should do, so motion and community, that's communication, is like you learn that when you teach lower school kids, motion. And yeah, so everyone, like, I'm not going to make you get up and move, but this is the part you need to hear. This is the part where they're going to really be laughing in the seniors' home. Okay, so he's had this experience at the film. He's watched the magic flute. He's watched Tamino pick up the magic flute and saves them all. I began to think of the flute as a kind of vehicle of consciousness, a way of knowing, a help in surviving the fires and the overwhelming forces of life, all those trials and illnesses that befall us. It doesn't have to be a flute, I thought. It could be a piano for the pianist, dancing for a dancer, fiber on a loom for a weaver, paint for a painter. Any instrument or material with which we could sing in the face of our fear. There was no question in the opera of Tamino playing the flute well. He just blew into it and it sounded. And that for me has been the driving force for all of my creative practice since that moment. Every teaching moment I have in any subject, it's not about being perfect. It's not about knowing how to play the piano before you can. It's not about knowing how to write the book before you write. It's not about being perfect. It's about picking up the flute and blowing into it. And it will become your vehicle. So you could all go now if you want, because that was the core. So he goes on in the book. Mastery was not an issue. Connection and belief were. Clay is my material, I thought, my vehicle, my magic flute. I could hardly wait to get home to play with the clay as I crossed the bridge between San Diego and Pacific Beach and looked out over the bay. I saw the tall Christmas tree image of lights that stands on the island there every Christmas. There's a large star on top. When I reached the Crystal Pier, there was, of course, no clay. My clay studio was back in Pennsylvania. I was terribly disappointed. I picked up my journal and wrote a brief entry, actually a question, dated December 25th, 1974. I wrote, "Is the artist in me and the healer in me the same person? Is art by its very nature, that which will allow me to be well? Is art by its very nature healing?" There was no clay in the bungalow, but in the drawer of the living room desk, I found a matchbook-like folder, left there as a courtesy by the motel management with some stationery, postcards, and a Bible. The folder had a needle and some colored threads in it. Oh, I thought, I could embroider something. I looked through my belongings and found a square of cotton cloth that I had used to wrap a pair of chopsticks in it. It was night. Just hang on. It was a night sky blue. Remembering the Christmas tree and star I had just seen glowing on San Diego Bay, I decided to stitch a star. I placed a chair under the only lamp, giving enough light to work by, and threaded the needle. I would just make a star as something to do, some act to ground my excitement and acknowledge my insights. I would see what would happen. I did not expect something to happen so soon, but something did. I knotted the thread, put my hand holding the needle under the cloth, and gently pushed the tip of the needle through it. As the tip of the needle appeared through the surface of the cloth, the light from the lamp above me bounced off the tip in the form of a star, an instantaneous, surprising, energetic star, a star of light leading the way. The surprise of it focused my attention on the needle as I drew it and the length of the thread up through the cloth till the knotted end caught and held the thread in its full length. I was holding the needle in my right hand. In my mind's eye, the needle increased inside. "It's a sword," I exclaimed, "a silver sword." Helen clapped. Paulus smiled. Alexandrite, labradorite, gold and silver, the mantle of the earth's core shivered with her own delight. In that moment, a needle as a silver sword captured my imagination. I didn't get very far with the star that night. That was only a little bit of thread in the matchbook, and I had to stop several times to work in my journal. I made notes about the needle as a tool, as a weapon, as a vehicle of consciousness, as a magic flute. The next morning, I bought some cotton and wool thread in a nearby store and continued working. I used darker wool threads to make a linear 5-pointed star and the brighter cotton threads to stitch fire-like shapes emanating from it. It wasn't much, but I was delighted by it, and yet uncertain about how and if I could continue. A day or two later, I started exploring the side streets of Pacific Beach on my long daily walks. I soon discovered a needlepoint canvas and yarn store only 2 blocks away. So I just want to show you, this is Crystal Pier. It's still there. You can go stay there. I did. This is it out over the ocean. It's like you're sleeping on the ocean. It's pretty intense. It's pretty intense. This is like the kitchen. I'm sure it's not an exact 1974 kitchen. This is the keys. It was pretty interesting. And I'm just going to say, for me, I think Tom was sick with COVID that night. I had gone out to visit him Christmas, December 2019, and he was so sick. I'd never seen him so sick. It was like, you seem to be sick. I think I'm going to check and see if I can stay at the Crystal Pier cottage. And I could, and I did, for not very much money, because there was nobody there. And he didn't die, but I really do think he had COVID before we even knew about it. But this is, you're sleeping out on the very ocean. And then I just have to say, so then I think we were in that area a little while later, and I had been doing this research and had been doing all this reading, and then I walked around the corner and there was the same needlepoint cottage. There it was. It was like, this, seriously? This can't be really, seriously, this can't be true. And there it was, the needlepoint cottage, and it was profound. So, I'll just show you a few more images. These are he did go on then from the life of being a ceramic artist to 8 years working in needlepoint while he lived in California. I'll read a little bit more about that later. But I just wanted to show you, and it was so mind-bending for me to be at the archives, like, wow, December 78, there's the slide, there it is. And there's much more in the book about this process and what he was doing. One more little sort of reading that I want to add, and then I'll sort of be to the end of this section, and then we'll stop and do a little break, and then I'll talk about how I put the structure of the book together and the happy ending. But obviously, if I was going to write a book about overcoming creative fear, I had to do that myself. And again, raised as I was in the generation that I have been in, owls are. I did not grow up with fantasy owls. I grew up with Trixie Belden. But very soon into the process of writing the book came my very own sort of magical, mystical writing experience. I'm very, very disciplined about my practice. Ask Casey if you can't sort of handle my discipline on that, you probably won't be able to be my friend for long, because I very rarely will break that. And that's artist friend years ago, we talked about that, the artists that have breakthroughs. Well, there's no magic to the breakthrough. It's just you're showing up often enough, consistently enough, that you are there when it wants to happen. So this passage that I'm about to read to you, from the outset, the book's narrative has been born of a resistance to the taboos I carried from my childhood, my formalized art training, and my own sense of what could be right, what should be right, and what I didn't dare do or say, but now I would. This book has been a lot of that. Paulus was my guide, how to do it. So from the beginning, the narrator of the Silver Sword story has been a 562-year-old Eurasian eagle owl angel, or more specifically, a guardian angel that accidentally turned herself into an owl. So if you remember Phyllis Diller, right? Okay, so Susanna, my owl narrator, is kind of the Phyllis Diller of guardian angels. She arrived into my imagination out of the blue, where I believe imagination is located. And Susanna's always making a mistake, terribly self-deprecating. I was very surprised by her, and I loved her all at the same time. And as chance would have it, I don't know if you've been keeping track, that's not what the whiteboard is for, but as chance would have it, not long after sort of Susanna appeared as, oh my gosh, I'm writing a book with the 562-year-old Eurasian eagle owl angel as my narrator. Wow. That's really odd. But I had a very good friend, Irina, in San Diego, and not long after Susanna arrived in my imagination, I was sitting and visiting with Irina. Casey knows her. And she started telling me this story. She's Russian. She's been in the US a long time, but she's Russian. And she began telling me the story of the Cossacks and how they would shapeshift into owls and fly ahead over the trees and see where the warriors were coming from, and then they'd fly back and turn back into humans and tell everybody where they're coming from. And I really loved Irina, and I really wanted to believe her, but I was like a little skeptical. And then she told me the Scottish did the same thing. And I'm 1/4 Scottish. So now Susanna was my friend, and we were kin, and I never doubted her again. I will just offer that. So the following that I'm going to read to you is from the book, and this is the part that I submitted to the Canada Council for the Arts that received a couple really gigantic awards that I still don't believe, and Casey read this part and said something hugely complimentary to me. It was really powerful. It's my friend Dr. Casey Hermanson right there. So I'm just going to read this part, and again, creative freedom, right? Overcoming creative fear. If you're going to write a book about it, you better be willing to do it. So I'll read this. It's a few minutes, not like forever minutes, and then we're going to do a doodle break. And this is me when I was in San Diego, when I did actually move there, which I'll talk about too. Actually spending some time with the Eurasian eagle owl angel with those glasses. They show up more often than I thought. And then of course owls start to become like something I collect, and feathers in particular. So we're in the car. Paulus is driving from Pennsylvania to California. He's looked in the rearview mirror and he sees Susanna sitting on the pile of books in the back seat. And so now this is Susanna narrating, talking. She says, "Was I real or not? Was he going crazy and dying of colon cancer or not?" Paulus stared at me. He slowed down. "Where did you come from?" he said. "Once upon a time and out of the blue," I said out loud in my best Latin. I didn't like conjugating full sentences. It didn't matter. He didn't understand. I blinked too and thought about a cigarette. "Owls don't smoke," he said. "Angels have many needs. Nicotine can be one of them," I thought. "But you're not an angel," he thought. "Yes, I am." "But," Paulus said out loud. I knew what he meant. Paulus wanted an explanation. He wanted to know all about the feathers and the missing halo. I owed him that, and I'd be generous. He'd get the full story. I'd read his file when the assignment came, but all I got was a calligraphic ink drawing. It said, "imaginative, prone to effluviate." I didn't know what effluviate meant. No one did. At least the word wasn't effluvium. I couldn't handle being assigned to one more old fart. Then I found out Paulus had made up the word. Paulus made up a lot of things. As it turned out, imagination was the necessary element to make our whole story possible. In time, I'd learned to effluviate, too. It wasn't that hard, I said. In fact, that was the problem. I should have taken more time to read the small print. But the advertisement was very clear. If I didn't like the experience, I'd get my money back. The small print said nothing about the risk that I might never get my angel body back. There was no one to ask. Everyone I knew was happy with being an angel. I was supposed to be too. Not everyone gets to be one. It's harder than being a saint. Saints get to be bad before they're good. Miracles can convince any social circle to forget your past. Angels have to be nice and good all of the time and stay white. I think that was the greatest appeal for an afternoon escape. I couldn't keep anything white. Plus owls have legs. They get to wear pants. And they get to fly fast. There's no dress to get caught in the wind. And their feathers have color and pattern. I lifted up my wings to show Paulus what I meant. See? It's a Navajo rug, or the rivers of Babylon or Texas from 30,000 feet. I pivoted around in the back seat and lifted my wings again. Paulus didn't move. He had changed his mind. He was pretending I wasn't there. "See," I shouted. I was determined to be understood. "I'm the steps of a ziggurat, or a tawny buff speck-lead brown wrapping paper for Father's Day. It's an endless list. One feather alone can cover most of the basic elements and principles of design." I jumped back to sit squarely in the middle of the back seat that was more like a shelf. The space was too small for luggage or golf clubs. It could hold 2 bags of groceries, blankets, a lot of books, and me. "How many things are white, Paulus?" I shouted again. "Every day I was white, always white. I was snow or clouds or a marshmallow. White, white, white. Nothing ever changed. It was a quarantine wardrobe." I jumped at an afternoon to be something else. "Don't just ignore me, see me." Paulus glanced in the rearview mirror. I was encouraged. The advertisement was very slick. "The sky swims with opportunity for all creatures that fly. Tired of your regular wings?" And I was. "Become a Eurasian eagle owl for the afternoon. Let our experts show you how. We offer a money-back guarantee if you're not completely satisfied with your ride." The experts looked very nice. I was waiting for my halo to dry again. They wore suits and ties and had short hair. I admired that. It's not easy for a troll to give up their hair. I sent in the money order. The machine came. It was small and easy to hold. The directions were clear and easy to follow, or so it seemed, but I read them too fast. I always read too fast. There's so much to read. How else to get through it all? That's where everything went wrong. I pressed start on the damned machine because machines are damned, and the shift was instant and I was gone. There was no time to read how to make the afternoon adventures stop. That's a serious engineering flaw. There should be a quiz or a short answer essay, something. I wasn't ready, but who knew that? Certainly not me. When I got back after the 3-hour flight, I didn't know what to do, and there was no one to call, and no one to answer for me now. I paused. I felt so alone. I was always alone. The outsider never has any friends. I couldn't tell if Paulus understood me, but his whole body was trembling. I knew at least he was listening. That's fine, don't answer me, I said to Paulus. No one answered me at that shape-shifting company either. I'd assumed the employees were gone for the night. I'd called the company back in the morning. They put me on hold. No one answered. 2 weeks went by. It's not hard to be on hold for 2 weeks. There was nothing else to do. Or it seemed like there was nothing else to do but nibble on my tongue with my beak. It was a new bad habit. Now I couldn't stop. Eventually I hung up. Next time I called back, shapeshifters had shifted out of business. It's not right. I wanted to sue. Companies that offer shape-shifting experiences should have all their protons in place and under control before they open up to the public skies. If I'd known better or been raised better, I might have had the confidence to see about an extended leave or help getting my angel body back or another assignment. But the bad upbringing is another kind of wishful thinking. I never had an upbringing of any kind. Angels manifest fully formed, so there was no one to blame but myself. It wasn't fair. I thought being an owl for an afternoon was going to be the fun thing to do. Entertainment shouldn't have eternal consequences. But I was too tired to fight them in court, and you were already packing the car. So that was my wild ride writing. And what I just want to kind of offer you for a little bit of a break, bathroom break or doodle break or water break or conversation break, just a little bit, or even if you have a couple questions, I can probably get myself back on track if you have a couple questions or some of you want to doodle. But at the end, I'm going to show you, there is a great documentary about Paulus called To Spring from the Hand, and I recommend that to any of you if I've piqued your interest about him. And in it, you will see him making any one of these doodle drawings. And it's based upon his silver sword experience of you do what you can with the moment that you have, and you have no expectation of what can come because you've never done it before. So on your table, and I'm going to just move, I'm just on your table, I do conveniently work at a lower school now, so I've just been going through all week gathering supplies for today. So if you wanted to, what Paulus does as part of this practice that creates these images is you just take a thread and you just like drop it down. And see, there's my first line. And I didn't have to worry about that or what it would be or what it wouldn't be. And then and there's paper if you want paper. But these are pretty cool, like these little whiteboard things are pretty cool. And then again, this is the silver sword practice. It's just doing what I have with the moment that I have. And there's no getting it wrong because I'm doing it. I've picked up my silver sword. I've picked up my marker. I've picked up my notebook. I've picked up my page. I've picked up that music book that I've been meaning to open. And then you just soon are having this experience, right? So I do invite you to try it. You honestly, and these things are so cool. These weren't invented when I was a kid either. That and glitter, So, and then you can go like this and make it go away and do it again. I would invite you to try it or just do a little doodle or ask me a couple questions now if you'd like, because I'm going to kind of watch for 4 minutes to go by just so you can shake your head or like try this and or if you are thinking this would be a good time to go, I do see a couple of you perhaps thinking of going. I'll say this now for some of you who might be leaving, and then if you're here to the end. At the very, very end of this project, 5 years later, and I've won 2 Canada Council grants. I was a finalist for the AWP Award. I've been transformed by the writing of the book completely. Changed my teaching practice, changed everything. So I'm feeling pretty like I better get this published. Got to get this thing published. That's what you do. You write a book, you got to get it published. But I have just written a whole book about kind of overcoming careerism, production, art as a product, art as an end game, writing as an end game. And I have been in correspondence some over the years with Joy Seidler, who is Paulus's very best friend. And I was corresponding with her, and if you would, just for some of you, I think this would be as important as anything else I might share. Because I think that's something we struggle with is, okay, I wrote this, and so now it needs to be published for it to be real, right? It needs to be out there on those shelves for it to be real. And Joy wrote back to me because I was feeling must publish book. And I do hope Green Writers Press is going to be my publisher for this book, but I don't know that for sure, completely written in stone. But Joy writes back as I tell her the book is finished, all these things have happened, now I'm looking for the publisher, here I'm to this stage. And she says, "Twice I have begun a reply only to have life intervene. Then your email and the taste of your literary adventures slowly sank out of sight in my email collection. Sigh. William Stafford limited himself to postcard-size replies, which I assume was to save his writing juice for his poetry. Assumptions are dangerous. Humans, a wise teacher says, are capable of holding 5 seemingly paradoxical notions at once. Whales can hold 9. I mention this as you may experience my responses as contradictory. Martha Graham, who Paulus danced and learned from, recognized that each of us have a unique piece of the cosmic puzzle. If we do not bring forth our gifts, the world will not know that particular energy. She articulated it better, but you get the idea. Having now written what you were compelled, called, divinely inspired to write, can you allow for that being enough? Are you able to know that the quantum field has been vibrated and your creation now lives in the lake of stories? In the unseen realms, hallelujah, hallelujah, well done you. Expectations are the root of all suffering. Rather than seeing publishing as the necessary end, might you approach it as a cosmic experiment? Devise a simple plan, execute it, and then release it to spirit. Trust that the way knows the way. Follow the fourfold way. Show up. Pay attention. Speak the truth. Don't be attached to outcomes. Move beyond challenge into conscious, possibly magic intention. Trust emergence. Miracles are probable. And when you've done your part, then let go with love and great gratitude. That was hugely powerful for me to know there is a lake of stories. And when you have written your story, when you have written that story, it does exist. The world is changed. You are changed. Dimensions are changed. And in the world of thinking that the marker is the publication. That's why Paulus buried his pots for 20 years, is when he recovered from his classic book, being a classic and being so important, and then that made him sick because he didn't know how to say no. And so he pulled out of his life for 8 years. When he did come back to making his work, everything he made, he buried it for 20 years. So he couldn't be owned or bought, or his creative process, his creative life, reduced to something for the market. So I just offer that because may you love everything you write and know that it is in the lake of stories, and that's a really powerful place. And they probably don't even have like overdue fines if you like take the book out. But that I am gonna just stop for like 4 minutes. And if some of you would like to try this, if some of you need to go, I'm now going to tell you all about the construction of the book and how I worked through that and the different challenges that I had, and then end with the happy ending, because we all want one. And but anyway, I just want to give you that chance to sort of doodle, draw, talk to a friend, take a breath, go to the bathroom, drink more Coke, or come say hi or ask a question. I'll just sort of watch the clock for 4 minutes for that to happen. Try the doodle, try it. Try the doodle. Sergey, are we turned off?
I can turn it off if you like.
Should we? Because unless the people in the live stream or the Cosmic Unknown or the YouTube. Okay. Okay, so come back in a couple of minutes. Just, I want to keep, with everyone faithfully still here, I want to just finish out the last bit and then be able to start questions by 5. So, how are you doing? Yeah, go out, yep. Okay, well, if you want, I want you have had a long day. Okay. For my audience people here, am I meeting your needs? Is there something you want me to? That was my really most important part I wanted to share. I can, yes. Right. 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 Yep. Yes. 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 Because where else? I think we draw it down and then we send it out and it's available to everyone. Yeah. Ah, that's so great. Oh, that's so great. Okay, let me just make sure I'm here. Yes, I'm to the obstacle page. Yep. So, your drawing is so great. I love it so much. I love it so much. Hi. Right. Yep. I'll talk about that a little bit in the last. I want to make sure there are times for more questions. I'm just going to take you through sort of yeah. Yes, I have been in communication with the publisher, but she seems to have, I think she's got pneumonia, and so I haven't heard from her, and it's just interesting to me because Paulus was not well, and this book is born from that time in his life, and now I seem to have encountered that in real life. So it's really, again, inviting me to investigate what the story is in real life. Yeah. So I think I should maybe keep going. So I want to just, yes, make sure I get to that last part. Okay, so can I start again? Yeah. So having shared with you the magic and the serendipity and all of these sort of very powerful imaginative experiences that I was having, I now want to show you the material that I was working with. This is going to all be pretty fast. These are files of Paulus's that I collected at the archives. Each of those is in each of those folders opens up into each of those is an image of his writing, and these are now files that I am creating for myself as I'm writing and grant writing and writing and grant writing and looking to find the support of what I need to be doing. And then right sort of in the middle of that, Casey and I get in a truck and I leave Pittsburgh, Kansas, and I move to San Diego and leave the university and that whole life. And then I keep writing, and then I keep writing and making folders and writing. And I'm working with Allison Pick, and we're writing. And these are my books that I've been reading over the years as I've been working on this. These are the grants that I've applied for that I didn't get, and more of the books that I've been reading. And just before I left for San Diego, this is an email from Allie. And I had 334 pages written, and what she told me was, you can see there in the yellow, to start over. She told me to start over. She told me to start over. So I did, and I wrote more grants, and didn't get them. And 6 months later, you can see here that she's kind of actually now recommending that I divide this up into 2 categories, and this is my creative, this is the other part of this talk. Allie, authority figures, she's a Booker Prize nominee, she's a brilliant writer, she's been my teacher, she's been working with me, and she's suggesting that maybe I divide it into 2. It can't work as creative, it can't be nonfiction and fiction at the same time. And I say in a way that I can't usually ever say, no, my book is nonfiction and fiction, because this is my story. And that's why I needed to tell you that first part, because this is my story. And my story is the one I needed to write, not the one that might work in a category or not work in a category or be more accepted in some kind of an environment. And what's, I think, most important about that is it was very hard for me to say, thank you, Allie, for reading all that and giving me this feedback, but no. And so then here, where I've received the grant now for $25,000, it's because I was writing my story. And writing my story my way for my creative freedom was what was so powerful to me. And you have to think back to Mrs. Miller, and you have to think back to that book I wrote when I was 8. And then you have to think of all of the times I've been rerouted from what I am, because the story that I needed to write was this one. So here's the grants. But it wasn't easy. This is working in California. Here's the drafts upon drafts. This is drafts upon drafts, and time, and more paper, and coil binding them, and thinking and walking. And then what happens kind of then after that is I moved back to Kansas. And it was on the way back on that drive in this truck. That's how much room I had. I moved back by myself. I packed up the truck. Tom and I had come back to Prairie Village. I had convinced him, our story had always been, he didn't want to be cold. He's from Kansas City. And I didn't want to be poor, which is why I never moved to San Diego. But then I convinced him I would just buy him a really warm coat, because this was crazy to live there. It's just... So on my way back, driving back with this truck, I read the book Refuse to Be Done, which is on revision. And I'm literally driving through the night in that truck by myself. It's a 20-foot truck, listening to this book on revision. And then I remember what was most powerful about the magic flute was the way it pulled apart. And at the intermission, the actors all left and became themselves. And you watched them leave the stage and have a cigarette, read their magazine, have a nap. And that then was the solution to the book. Because trying to do the creative fiction, nonfiction, was solved by that. And those of you here could have maybe figured that out at 3:30 when I first started talking. But it took me 5 years. And then after that, as you read, Ali agreed, and one of my practices is to make a very large map, visual map. So this was me creating then my own frame story that allowed me to take all of the work that I had done, and I read the part where Helen is reading on the train, Paulus's actual story, so it could be his words and not mine. But then I could use the frame, the film of the stage to create the finished book. I also wrote this book to understand what happened to the environmental movement, and in my research I read this book, Losing Earth, A Recent History by Nathaniel Rich. It will take you to the actual meeting, conference, and article that kind of ended that movement. And I do not write what I know, I write what I want to know. And so through the creation of this book, I have seen our world change in 5 years. We don't need more information about our eco-catastrophe, we need hope. And I've come to sort of see that nature will never stop making wiser children, so the future is secure, and this book taught me that. And so that's what I've been writing. And this is Hollyhock, where I teach in the summer, and this is a magazine that I found from 1975. And this is Paulus here sort of saying right at the very end, and he, only we can measure the length of our journeys. The stop we get on and the stop at which we get off, even if it is only that we write that one good story, if it brings us happiness, a real happiness, then and perhaps only then do we really become what we are. And he wrote that at Bennington College back in 1957 in Vermont, where I do hope the publisher, Green Writers Press, and even if I'm not able to publish with them, please look at D.D. Cummings' amazing books, and that Paulus, who started at Bennington, would come back to Bennington. And then you needed to meet Tom, who sent me on this path, and there's those pink glasses. And Florence, my cat, who I could not write without her. And one of Paulus's very early pots, and his hands again. And then Casey, I did not add your name on there because I knew you were coming today. You always exist on that front page as gratitude for your support. And here's Paulus on my writing desk. There's a sweet young girl in kindergarten. She made those goggles that are clipped on the top that solved the book for me, an ending part. And then here are just some things I would draw your attention to. The documentary, To Spring from the Hand, beautiful. Paulus Berensohn and the Pebble Ritual is a YouTube that I created. And then Penland, that's where Paulus did teach for 45 years, a tribute to him and his work. So I hope what I have delivered to you is your silver sword. It can be so many other things than your interest in writing, and that you write. I do believe we all have one, and we just need to pick it up and blow into the flute or pick up something and it becomes your sword. And then, honestly, if nothing else, that you can see the magic will come, the magic begins when you pick up that silver sword, and it will take you the rest of the way. I never could have imagined this, but everything does come out of the blue. So thank you. Watch the documentary and Green Writers Press. And if the book stays in the Lake of Stories, this opportunity and things like this, may that transformation be enough, because I do think it is in the community of us that makes all the difference. I've seen that too. Publishing a book is just publishing a book. It's in the community that we build that makes the real difference. Yeah. So thank you for staying through to the end, and I think any questions would be off time, because goodbye live stream, and Joe and my dad and Tom and my mom. So, yeah, thank you.